I'm on it.
We are live.
We are live committee. This is Senate Finance, and this is March 28th. We haven't gotten a hold of Tim Devlin yet. We're looking for a drafter, but I know when this all disintegrated yesterday afternoon, the feeling really was that didn't have a grasp of some of this committee members knew. So I think we'll start with Barb. And I think some of the concern, one of the places it seems to be focused around is not you're getting phone numbers, that we understand. But the whole requiring notice, I mean, if Comcast is down, everything in my house is down. There's no way Comcast can read, and they don't have my cell phone number. So why are they notifying me of something that's pretty obvious?
So I'd be happy to explain our thinking on that. I'm Barbara Neal, Executive Director of the 911 Board. Thanks for having me back in. On that particular issue, there were conversations, as you spoke about yesterday, I believe, in this committee, several years ago about an outage notification. That's
We
for,
worked on that.
yeah, we developed and we adopted
Right.
that rule. And that rule requires notification to the 911 board and our system provider when an originating carrier, a telephone company, that has a loss of service that meets certain
At
thresholds.
one town, it was out for a week.
Mhm, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. So that rule is already in place. And what we see on this piece about having originating carriers notify their customers is really an extension of that, would be an extension of that rule. So in addition to notifying us, they would notify their own
But
customers.
if their customer service is down,
Sure, so yeah,
how do they do that? And don't tell me they'll put it on their website, because the last place I'm gonna look is Verizon's website. That's
So,
just
right.
not in my thinking.
Right, so one of the things that we have thought about, and let me add that these ideas are not fully formulated yet because it needs to be done in rulemaking. Right, but one thing that has been suggested is perhaps we could require that the phone companies have some sort of registry of their customers, that their customers could provide alternative notification information for instances like this. Some customers, I do believe, would be interested in knowing if their service was out. So that would be, that's one idea. And I think I would, if this passes, I would fully expect robust conversation on all these different components about how best to accomplish that.
Okay, but
So
yes, I'm doing an internal cost benefit here. I think if we feel this is necessary, and we are the committee of jurisdiction, then I think we have an obligation to say, this is necessary, and you figure out the details. I
Mhm.
don't think this committee is quite comfortable with that, or, I'll leave it, why don't we stick with you and just leave that subject? What else is in here that you feel is necessary?
Okay, if I could stay on that subject for just one more sentence. It's important for like emergency management officials to also know when customers are out of service. Because if they have to send,
Right, but you know that, they have.
We-
to notify.
we do, but yeah, well, that's true, that's a good point, we do know that point, but that's sort of the other component of this. Is not only can those people not make 911 calls, they cannot receive notifications from the
I think we're
state.
going back to the old fire whistle, which in many towns would be as effective, and it isn't subject to power outages. There used to be a warning, and I assume it was probably in the old days, we were expecting a raid from Canada, but the siren would go off, and you at least knew something bad was happening.
Mhm.
Some places you could tell by my hometown, you had a chart on your town calendar, and you could tell by the way the whistle went where the fire was.
Right.
Right. it doesn't have the same electronic problems that this does, and it might be something to put in there.
Okay, that would not be something that I would have, or the board would have purview over, but, you know, so
But
noted.
I'm thinking with the wall of water is coming down Main Street, that might be the fastest way to notify people that it's here, it's coming.
Well, I would certainly defer to Vermont Emergency Management on the best way to do those types of notifications. We feel, and this was discussed, actually, the notion of carriers notifying their customers during our original rulemaking several years ago. It didn't make it to the final cut because we were under some pretty tight timelines from the legislature
Yeah.
to get the other parts of the rule going. So it's not a new topic.
No,
Okay. So, and then you wanted to go on to the other piece.
yes,
Okay.
what is this actually doing?
So right now, the 911 board has data, customer data. We have names, we have addresses, we have phone numbers of individuals who subscribe to wireline, and by that I mean legacy wireline.
There are very few of us. We just left and went to Comcast, so
Right.
you can't notify me.
So we have the data from the wireline carriers like Consolidated and others. You're correct, we do not have the data from VoIP service providers like Comcast, like Charter, and there are others. We do not have the data. We would like to collect that data so that when we send all of this information to Vermont Emergency Management for the purposes of the reverse notification, or some is called reverse 911.
That Senator Hinsdale isn't here, so if you wanna move her chair out against the wall, you can sit there.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
We try to treat our staff nicely.
Right, so as I was saying, so we have a partial set of data from the legacy wireline companies. What we would like is the customer data from the VoIP service providers to make that set of information more complete. So that when emergency management needs to do a notification to the public about the wall of water or what have you, they have a complete set of data.
Right.
Or let me word it this way, as complete a set of data as we can provide for wireline and VoIP providers. This
My
has,
number didn't change, so I assume if you dial my,
your class of service would have changed though in our systems, right? So you would have been in the wireline or the AVI
but if you dial
database.
that number, no matter where, it's gonna ring in my house.
But we don't know that you exist because you're no longer in the AVI database, the wireline database that we maintain. So that's where the gap is, and you and lots of other people have gone to VoIP service. So that's one set. One thing I want to make really clear is that this ask for data collection has zero impact on wireless companies. We don't need
Well,
their
I
customer
thought
data and we're not
wireless-
asking for it.
Okay, because when this was here Friday, my understanding was you were asking for that from wireless. You are
No,
not.
we are not asking, excuse me, for customer data from wireless companies. We are asking for it from VoIP companies.
Okay, and they have agreed to that.
They have agreed to the language that was in the amendment that was discussed then and on the floor today. But I want to clarify, they've agreed to that as a starting point for a rulemaking conversation.
Okay.
And there will be discussion back and forth on the specifics of that, but there was some baseline language in the amendment or in S 310 originally that they were not comfortable with. So they reached out and we hammered out this compromise language that you've been seeing now. I think this is the second time or however that has worked out. So Comcast has agreed to that, I would say, as a baseline or a starting point for discussion in the rulemaking.
Committee, any questions at this point? Right.
Hi, good to see you in person. I am just thinking about data questions, and data security issues, like So I'm a little unclear about, so we have the automatic member indicator and automatic location indicator data that flows through. We're very, generally, I think we're very careful about who can receive what data, how is it shared, how does it move around.
Yes,
In your estimation, does any of what's being proposed open any kind of door to this information being used in a way that the original restrictions guardrails didn't anticipate, or or we could, they could be circumvented, or, is data secure
yes,
and managed as originally required?
yes. So the 911 board maintains that alley database, which is the legacy wireline
Yeah.
Information in a separate database. We would maintain this VoIP information. The amendment actually specifies, and this was one of the things we worked through with Comcast, was to provide clarity around the uses of the data that we would like them to provide. So in that section of the amendment, there's various references to section 7059A1, B, and several others that I'm not remembering right now. But basically what it does is it clarifies that the 911 board can use the data we provide or we receive from VoIP providers for system maintenance and quality control, and for purposes of the emergency notification system, so the reverse notification, public notification function that's performed by Vermont Emergency Management. And the changes that you see in that section also preserve, this was one of our concerns, also preserve our ability to use data that we have maintained for 25 years for the purposes that we have always used that data for. So that's why you see these different references to sections of the existing statute.
Okay. I guess I'm getting confused because people keep talking about data and reporting. I was under the impression, because wireless people were saying we don't agree, when Comcast had the, I assume what basically their compromise last Friday, you were asking wireless.
So if I could explain that.
Yeah.
So the compromise language that we came up with Comcast does not impact wireless carriers. So they didn't offer a comment on that portion. CTIA, which is the organization that represents all of the wireless companies, does object to the customer notification piece. They would like to see that requirement struck in its entirety.
Okay.
We disagree. And I have spoken, I don't know if he's on the call today. No.
Yeah.
We have,
No.
Ben Aaron is on. Okay, but I had spoken with probably Ben's colleague, Matt Tatora at CTIA last week as all these conversations were going on. And essentially we had gotten to the point where we agreed to disagree. We think that companies notifying their customers of outages is important. We think the customers have the right to know directly from the carrier who has the best information about that outage.
But if the carrier is out, how is the carrier going to notify me that my phone that he's calling me on is out?
Well, it may be that, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, there may be mechanisms that could be put in place to do that, or to allow the customer to sign up for that type of notification. These are the things would be hammered out in rulemaking.
Okay, but if this is the issue that is holding up this whole section of the bill, is it important enough to die on your sword? Because I wouldn't give odds right now as to where the Senate's gonna go with this amendment.
I will leave that to your committee, obviously. I was asked for input on how on S310 to improve government response to natural disasters. I provided that the input that you see in section 19 and then some additional as well. And so that was my response to that inquiry. And I stand by those recommendations.
I know, but we've had some arguments, at least not around the table, that those were your responses, not necessarily discussed response with your board.
So I think that was clarified, perhaps
I think it was,
sufficiently
but I
by
guess-
Senator Hardy,
Yes,
and the correspondence from the board chair?
yes.
Okay, and I think
I just wanted, that's been floating around in the ether, and I just wanted to put it out there.
Mhm.
Senator McCall.
I think to a certain extent, we've been arguing over the basics of administrative law. The operative, the administrator, does not go to the board to get approval for everything he or she says.
Right.
There's a certain amount of administrative discretion. And this is struck me that your statements were within the range of administrative discretion. And the board always has the option of coming and saying, no, that's not what we meant. But I don't think that the fact that the administrator speaks without going to the board first, that's never troubled me. That's how government is supposed to work. I am troubled, but maybe not terribly, that the committee of jurisdiction over utilities has presented language dealing with utilities and told, well, there isn't time for the committee of jurisdiction to deal with it properly, so just pass it. That doesn't strike me as good
I think
process.
that's what's been driving
But-
this committee things.
But we're discussing it now,
Yes,
and the discussion has included the statement that this is not definitive, this is not final. This is an instruction to get started putting together a program.
Right.
And that, I think, as I said, I'm disturbed, but I'm not sure if I'm all that disturbed. That may answer my question. So I leave now one question, which is the kind of line of reasoning I have just articulated has a bad history. When people think the way I'm thinking now, they often make mistakes. Okay, that something terrible happens and you say, oh my God, I had no idea what we were doing. So the question is, what is the terrible mistake we're making? If we just say, we'll accept the language, it's the work of the,
I think what I'm uncomfortable with is going forward when we haven't got any buy-in from the wireless people. It's one thing to say, we're gonna go to rules, this is our starting spot, and we can agree on the starting spot. But we don't seem to have a starting spot with the wireless people, and that may be their party line, I don't know. But I think we would all like to get this bill moving. I know I would, and I'm gonna get some shit.
I agree with everything you just said, and I'm not gonna say it's a terrible thing. It's the thing that is why I still have pause, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. But before I do that, I just want to say I really like the compromise language you came up with Comcast, and this is a great bill. I think the government operations has done yeoman's work in pulling together something great. My pause is really on the language for the wireless carriers, which is F1 and 2. I think you're familiar with what every originating carrier shall. This is what I would love to hear Barney's reaction to. It's the testimony from CTIA. And I had not heard the counterpoints to it. So this is from the testimony. I think I raised it yesterday, but it's really great to have you here. So this is the acknowledgement that there are a number of reasons why outages would not impact a consumer's ability to reach 911 is a significant reason why the FCC considered but expressly declined to impose requirements like these following a 2022, very recently, rulemaking. In its report and order, the FCC cited the unnecessary customer notifications would cause consumer confusion or panic. Moreover, security concerns were raised by the FCC because information detailing wireless network outages is considered protected critical infrastructure information under federal law and is closely guarded from disclosure for reasons of national security. That was enough with the information that I had to just pause, as well as the others. What are your thoughts and reactions to those concerns in this testimony I see before me?
We share concerns about any threats to critical infrastructure anywhere. And don't feel that the existing rule that we have, because this was a point of conversation during that rulemaking as well, about even releasing information about outages to the 911 board and the emergency responder community could be,
We do that now. So
we do that now. We do that now. There was also discussion around the, the information that we require in our outage rulemaking. Some of that is already identified as presumed public and presumed non-public, and there was robust discussion around that. The wireless carriers, in particular, and I'm not gonna recall the positions of all of the carriers, but in particular, the wireless carriers were argued against that for this very reason. But we went through the rulemaking process. We had input from legal. The board considered this fully in that process. The information that we're collecting is not specific. We are not collecting, nor do we want specific information about the technology that's impacted in an outage, the site if that's impacted, or the facility. We don't need that address.
I thought you needed that so that you knew 911 was out there.
We don't need to know, we need to know where the customers are that are impacted. We don't need to know, I'm gonna use just a simple example. We don't need to know that tower A is disabled because component XYZ with serial number 1234 has failed. We don't need to know that. We need to know that the customers served by that tower may not be able to call 911. So we ask for, in our rule, we ask for the general cause of the outage, which could be a tree fell on a wire. We don't ask for a specific location. If we're given a specific location or technical information like that, and we get a public records request for this information, we redact it because of that concern that was just mentioned. So we ask for very general information. We do not ask for, nor do we want, the specific location of an impacted customer. So we want to know that wireless company ABC's customers in Montpelier may have difficulty or may not be able to reach 911 or receive an emergency notification. We don't need to know that it's Senator Ann Cummings at 123 Main Street. Okay, we don't need to know that. So that is the difference, I think. The SEC and Homeland Security obviously have concerns about the national infrastructure. And I think the information that they collect for their purposes, it certainly does fall into that category because they've made that determination. I don't feel that the nature of the information we are requesting is anywhere near that. Okay.
So the language that's now in the bill, which I didn't read, I'm wondering if there is a softening of that could allay some of these concerns, because it is pretty precise in saying the following: notification of outages described in this subsection shall include at a minimum a posting of basic details regarding the outage on the originating carrier's website. My understanding too with cell towers is they're mandated to support each other. So if one goes down, even if they report that Verizon's down, this calls will still be working. So for them to intercoordinate. So have you looked at alternative language that might be more flexible in this attempt to align what you just said?
No, actually, because we weren't provided any alternative language from CTIA in this very brief amount of time that we've had conversation, right? I mean, so, but to address the all call delivery, right? That one wireless company supports another. So if one company is down, the call can be transmitted on another tower. That is dependent on technical compatibility between the services. I cannot speak to that today, but I would be very interested in knowing, because I have heard that from CTIA and others, that there's this system in place. But I would be very interested to know in Vermont, what does that look like? Who can roll over, so to speak, to who and where?
But the difference in this bill, they already notify you, right?
Yes.
You have some protections around it.
Yeah.
The difference now is notifying me that the Verizon tower is out. I think what they're saying is, yeah, well, that Verizon tower is out, but it's bouncing off the one in Waitsfield and coming into Montpelier, so my service isn't out. And it's the notification to the customers that seems to be the sticking point in this.
Right, so,
So I'm just,
sorry.
how far are we gonna, is it worth seeking the whole thing?
But. Right, so I still have pause in this language because disclosure of such information could give bad actors actionable information about infrastructure vulnerabilities. But I respect the time pressures that we have here. So I feel like something that's very feasible that's been to put out there is we could pass this without the language that this is a concern. And the House is still going to take testimony on this, and then we can get our ducks in a row and add back a variation when we have more time. So there's some breathing room. I don't, you're nodding, so I'm curious if that would be in a path you'd endorse.
That would, it's certainly we'll accept the decision of the committee,
Sure.
right? Okay, so, we're happy to continue in discussions on this. I do stand by my recommendations. I just want to state that for the record. But if we fully expect more conversation on this in a rulemaking anyway, so if that needs to happen now or as we go
What
through.
happens is, we need to make sure that it's necessary. And then they just detail out what we've determined as necessary. And I have a hard time doing something that a major carrier is opposed to. I mean, we haven't got any common ground there.
Mhm.
Just wondering.
Understood.
Okay, have we?
Just a quick question. So you, I'm gonna ask you, it's kind of a hard question, but from your standpoint, are there any aspects of the proposal that have any sort of legitimate controversy in them? You know, like you can see another way of looking at it. That someone you said, oh, well, I understand why this gives so and so pause. But you're proceeding with your recommendation regardless, right? And so I'm trying to understand what concerns are being raised that from your point of view on the inside seem like, well, it's a fair enough question, criticism, concern, whatever.
Right.
But you feel like you have an adequate answer at this point, or that a process will sort this out at some point.
I think that would apply to all of the language that we talked through with Comcast, right? So they raised some legitimate concerns that were sort of better understood as the conversation went on.
Right.
Which typically would occur in or could occur, right, in rulemaking. And I think we demonstrated in our previous rulemaking that we engage in those conversations fairly and openly and all of that. So this one feels a little different just because those conversations are happening at this point, which is different from my experience.
Sure.
So, that, and the other part of your question is, are there still pieces in this where I can see points of
Like there are different legitimate differences of opinion or uncertainty or things that, it's like, okay, I don't agree with that, but it's a legitimate point to raise, I'm not like I'm asking you to undermine your own case. You also understand better the concerns other people are raising.
I think it's important that and very open to continued discussions through a rulemaking. I do believe that carriers should be required to notify their customers of an outage, but the specifics of that we can talk about.
Sure.
So if we can demonstrate, for example, or the carriers can demonstrate where this rollover, failover exists between compatible companies, perhaps that information can somehow be built into the threshold for reporting, right? If that condition does not exist, then you need to report, because we do not want to add confusion to the customer. That is true. So, but we also think it is important for customers to know that their service is out.
But if my service is out, how do they notify me that my service is out?
That's what we would need to work out in rulemaking. It really is, So we're thinking like some type of proactive registry. In conversations that I've already had with carriers, I don't think that they're going to enjoy that recommendation, and so
I
we'll
don't
talk
think
it
I'm
through.
going to enjoy having to register personal information out there. To be notified that my Comcast service is down when I know it's down because nothing in my house works.
Right. I think any opportunity, maybe this is the simplest way for me to explain my position here. Any opportunity for the customer to know that service is down before they need to place a 911 call is important. So that if there's an emergency and they know their service is down, they can not waste time trying to reach 911 on this service because they know it's down. So if there's a message that has been received out there, or maybe via a website, that wireless company ABC is down, you may not be able to call 911. And then I have to call 911 and am not able to get through, I'm done trying because I have that information. So I'm using a different device in my home, or a device with a different service, or I'm going to the neighbor, or I am implementing whatever my personal preparedness plan might be in that case. But I've had a heads up so that I'm not making that, or I've had the opportunity for a heads up. I mean, it's not gonna catch everyone. It is not, I agree. So,
So two things. One is on that point, sounds like a vision of customers proactively checking in to make sure their service is still operative. So that should a 911 call be necessary, that they would know that they're not actually gonna get through. And I'm honestly having a little trouble imagining people on a proactive basis, regularly checking to make sure that their 911 service is up. But anyway, the other thing, back to the rulemaking, is there anything in this language that sets us along? Rulemaking, we delegate authority, we have to provide adequate direction. I'm trying to understand the direction provided. Does it in any way send us down a certain pathway in resolving the issues that are coming up? As opposed to leaving it entirely open to be sorted out by the rulemaking process. And if it's that open, is it so open that we're not really expressing legislative intent where it's?
I wonder, I guess my comment to that would be that the committee needs to make a decision on whether or not they feel that customer notifications are an important tool in improving government response to natural disasters. And if so, then you have a rulemaking. Yeah.
To connect this is a natural disaster bill and disaster response. This sounds like a general information bill, knowing when 911 is out. I'm not seeing, I can see where they're vaguely related, but I'm not seeing where they're integral to our disaster response. I really, there's a wall of water coming down the street. I want to know that. And I'm really not thinking about 911. I'm grabbing my cell phone.
Well, until you need to call 911 in that emergency. And so I think that's what we're trying to get some level of like
So we're talking
situational
two different
awareness.
emergencies. One is a public emergency. Downtown is flooded, right? I had no idea I was supposed to go to City of Montpelier's Facebook page to find out what was going on. Took me a couple of days to get that message. Sarah went up doing that one today.
Okay.
Thank you. And if it's talking about this bill, I mean, I think about 911 when my husband's dropped on the floor with chest pains. That's an emergency to me. And that's, I've got a cell phone and I want to make sure I keep it charged. But there's probably a charged cell phone in the house if my landline is down. But nobody notifies me, my phone is out and there's no alarm that goes off. There is with my Comcast phone, it tells me it's a low battery. But my cell phone doesn't ever tell me it's a low battery. I need to keep that charged. To me, there's a difference. One is my personal emergency, which I don't really say gee, he might have a heart attack today, so I gotta make sure 911's working.
Right.
The other
Right.
one is, in an emergency, I don't know, unless the water was up to the windows of my house, I don't, 911 wouldn't be where I call. I don't think.
Okay, I mean, that's fair enough. The other component here, just to keep in mind, is there's the ability to access 911, which we want customers to be aware if there's a problem with that. And there's also the reverse, the notifications from the state, in our case, Vermont Emergency Management, being able to get to the customer. So, so there's two components to it, which is maybe how
Emergency
it's
management
taught.
calls?
Via the VT alert system, they
Yeah,
have the
I get it on my
capacity.
cell phone. They come as messages, not as phone calls or as emails. They're messages. My
So
phone system doesn't have a message system.
I would defer to Eric Forent for the details, but in my understanding, VT Alert has the capability of kind of overriding all of that and sending a phone message to phone members,
Okay.
which is why we provide that Ally database, the Wirelite database.
I think
And
you should have all the phone numbers in the state. I think we should have reverse E911. That to me is different than having Verizon notify me every time a Verizon tower that might, because I might be here and I might be there.
right,
Um,
correct. And just on that point, because I've heard that argument before, or not that argument, that comment. We do think customers are smart enough to figure out that if they're in Burlington and it says the outage is in Brattleboro, that it's not gonna impact them in Burlington. We think they can figure that
yeah,
out.
okay.
So there you go. I mean, that's.
I mean, I guess it's just
where I
if this could sink the bill,
Mhm,
and is it worth? Well, could sink this section,
this section.
I think. I'd like to come to comments.
We've been rushed enough that I am not thoroughly immersed in the actual language. Is there anything in the bill that says, or that can be implied, taken to imply, that part of how this notification comes is in anticipation that the system should be set up so that customers know in advance where to go when 911. But I'll say, for example, I get my radio on my phone and I get my radio on my laptop. I don't get my radio off a radio anymore. But there are times when the radio doesn't come in on my phone,
Mhm,
but it does come in on my laptop. In other words,
Mhm.
you have different
Multiple
technologies, multiple avenues.
to get to the information.
Yeah,
I
and there's,
assume all Vermonters have multiple
yeah,
communication systems. The poorer you are, the harder it is to afford. You might find many older Vermonters, especially poorer ones, have a landline, period, the end. They might have a basic email thing, but it's dangerous to make assumptions that everybody has two modes of communication. It also gets very expensive to have, I look at my Comcast bill and I make up.
I could add one more thought. You actually jogged my memory. We've been talking mostly about unplanned outages, right? And sort of what the value of a carrier providing a notification about an unplanned outage. Because it might not get to the right person or the right place at the right time to be useful, correct? The other part of this would be planned outages. So if a carrier knows that their system is going to be, that there's gonna be maintenance or some sort of planned outage on their system that will impact customers' ability to reach 911 or receive those notifications, the customer should know. In those cases, it would be of value to know in advance that at 2 AM, your call to 911 on wireless company XYZ may not go through.
I'm not talking about anticipating a particular failure, just anticipating the likelihood, or at least the possibility of failures at some point in the future. The old person with no money, who everything only has a landline, we could identify who those people are and make sure someone knows that they only have a landline.
Well.
And they do a welfare check, you know.
Yeah, that is basic information we don't have. Who, what, no. We don't have who has what equipment, who has any equipment. That kind of basic inventory. We don't know who just has a landline, who has a cell phone, 3 cell phones with 3 separate numbers. And an avoid system. We don't know that, so we don't know who we're missing.
I can ask.
But I have one more witness. Mr. Whitaker wants to talk. And I think then we'll have some committee discussion and we might. Yes,
We don't hear from CCIA, please.
they were here to answer
Okay.
questions. So if we have questions, that's what they're here for. This is really for a chance for the committee to understand what really is in this proposal, because we haven't had time to really do them.
Let me say, I was very sorry that Senator McConnell yielded the floor. I was really looking forward to hearing that. How you tied up your.
Not really sure what happened at GCG, Mark.
Okay.
Well, I think the point was redundancy. If I got it, the point was
We're
redundancy.
focusing, committee.
What?
We're focusing
Well,
on,
the redundancy, I think, is the.
I know, when we got Japanese cell towers, I got a little off.
That's called an analogy, Chair.
Okay,
Good afternoon, Stephen Whitaker from Montpelier. I'd like to just help you collect your perspective on this magnitude of the issue and some possible solutions. But I'm convinced that this amendment is not ready that you should leave 19 struck and address it on the House side to the degree they can. The primary issue in here is location privacy. That it's not calling 911 is the customer prerogative. And the amendments to the 911 statutes shift the prerogative to the state and allow what was prior very protected information. We put 30 years ago, we put real strict guardrails around the uses of this data.
that's what
And now-
911 is, an state agency.
Correct, and now this is basically opening that up and allowing 911 to share its data with VEM. And that's a secondary use, and what is this tertiary use gonna come? This happened with, I'll use a reference that might be familiar to you. The Vermont medical record system originally was only gonna broker or link data between hospitals and clinics, and then they collected a whole data set. And then they decided they're gonna share that data set with everyone without the customer consenting. So at this point, you have to deal with the question of how are you gonna get the customer's consent to have their location information of every VoIP account and every cell account be shared potentially with secondary and tertiary uses. This is a humongous privacy issue that you're not gonna figure out this afternoon. Currently, when a tower fails, you will lose voice service off of your own carrier, but you still might have 911 service because 911 calls are allowed to roam onto any other carriers. So if you're in an area that is served by more than one carrier, you could still make a 911 call, but you won't necessarily know you can't call your husband or your child. So what it brings to mind is a potential solution which needs to be investigated. I'll say this for Hunter's benefit, is we could have such a, we could aspire to implementing some kind of dynamic roaming, so when a particular carrier's tower goes out, it automatically triggers roaming onto the competing carriers for both voice and 911, not just for 911. That would be a way to allow this kind of notification. Again, the notification should only be by subscription. It shouldn't be, it should be, asked for by the subscriber, not imposed upon subscribers. What would be necessary uniquely and relevant to this committee's jurisdiction is the cell site propagation mapping, which has some confidentiality issues between and among carriers. But yet you authorized in the budget last year that the Public Safety Communications Task Force needs to map the propagation across the entire state, not just the state highways on the V-Trans snowplows, but every hill and dale. And yet the 911 board or the director, not the 911 board, responded to the RFP question saying, no, we're not going to let that data be used. So the 911 board has the only data set of the azimuth, tilt, and elevation of every cell site in the state that's used to calculate the location of callers. So we've got a contradiction going on here about what we're willing to do and what we're not willing to do, that really this committee needs to, or the Joint Talk Committee needs to spend some real time on. So have the VoIP subscribers, customers that are seeking to be the subscribers or the victims of this proposal consented to release of their data to VEM and to the 911 board. I would argue they haven't, and that these companies would be under an obligation to obtain that consent before they could release that data. These are fundamental rules of data protection that I've been studying for 30 years because a bill was introduced by OBI that long ago, based on the Isle of Man, and Europeans are way ahead of us on data privacy. E911 has chronically disregarded the statutes regarding rulemaking. The most egregious example is where they adopted a standard and then they did a rule, and then they keep changing the standard and think that, oh, because our rule points to the standard, we don't have to redo the rulemaking. And that's an abusive process that I've raised to LCAR that needs to be. So it's important that if we're going to authorize and or mandate new rulemaking, that we get a handle on what's gone wrong in the past decades.
We have 15 minutes to do that.
Yes, I'm saying this is not big. Section 19 is not ready for prime time. I think I flagged the most important issue. In closing, I will say another important issue that all committees should be concerned with was what you were just notified on the floor of an open meeting violation by phone polling a board and getting their consent to retroactively grant authority to the executive director to represent them here on this legislation.
Oh, what happened?
Well,
I think the executive director had that.
Yeah.
not to change statute, not to recommend changes.
Oh, well, that's-
This is not, we're not getting into
Yeah,
this.
Yeah, I just wanted it on the record. Thank you.
Just one, why would these concerns not be taken up in the rulemaking process?
Because the change to statute can't be, the change of statute is being done, is only the prerogative of the legislature. And in effect, you're doing that, assuming that the rulemaking is gonna solve the problem, but you haven't understood the implications of the change of statute that you're being asked to make.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. I do have one question.
Sure.
So when you're talking about when your carrier's down, you could roam to another,
Only for 911 calls.
only for 911. So if your carrier notified you that their service was down, could you have a misimpression? Because you'd say, oh, my carrier has told me they can't provide 911 service right now. But in fact, you could roam and you would think you could use 911, but you could. Am I
Yes.
saying that?
So you are understanding that correctly, only in an area where you have multiple carriers. A lot of areas of Vermont only have one carrier.
Just wanted.
So you could cause unnecessary panic with those
You
alerts.
could, or you could not. Okay,
Thank you.
I think there's a legal question. Barb, do you have a legal opinion? Have you gotten a legal opinion on whether or not Comcast has the right to just give you my name, phone number, and address? I mean, isn't there any privacy?
Well, we have had conversations with Comcast about what information they would be able to provide. They do not believe they should be providing the customer name, which is really not what we need. We need a phone number and a location. In order to be able to do these reverse notifications. So that was going to be things that were hammered out in rulemaking, but we understand their concern from the get-go on that. So I think the ability to collect that information or the authority to collect that information would come from this language.
No, I have a feeling that there are privacy requirements. When I sign up with Comcast, I don't give Comcast the right to tell anybody else what my phone number or address is.
Right.
And
That is not a concern that I recall hearing from them, except as it related to the customer name. So I think, yeah.
I would assume they have much better corporate lawyers than we do. And if I've had any experience with corporations, is they cover your backs, they bankruptcy. Because we're not buying this, right? This is a freebie. Okay, committee. The bill is on the floor, the amendment is on the floor. We have said we have not had time to really come to a decision. Can't really read the Senate at this point, but if it goes as it normally would, that amendment is probably gonna go on tomorrow and the bill is gonna pass. Unless we can come up with something, or we can leave it to the House to work out. Or we could stay here for several more.
I don't want the bill to die, but I stand by our amendment, finance committee removing this language and would if we take a vote on this substitute amendment, I don't support it as it is.
Okay, no, I think we've decided we don't support it as it is, at least yesterday we did. Senator Bray.
I would second that. I mean, I think the unusual thing, Kimberly Rumor has, I think he'd never seen this, by offering a substitute amendment on a committee report, not.
Well, she wanted us to offer the amendment and we declined.
Right, but we, in essence, we're no longer voting on our recommendation, and that would mean, in essence, we're telling the room it's fine. We don't recommend the strike. And this meeting here tells me that there's good cause for having concerns about moving ahead with that language. And more time might solve it, all for solving it, but I can't in good faith say I'm gonna quietly not want to share with my colleagues that we have that concern anymore. It just
Okay.
seems to mislead them instead of inform them.
I've got two, that we have to decide, I assume what I'm going to do tomorrow.
Do we ruin this bill by not having this section in it? And so generally,
It's an unconnected session.
it's an, okay, so the idea of leaving it to the House, there's several more weeks to the session. Leave it to the
Don't
House.
say that.
We trust the
We got
House.
one bill today. Did you get that, Senator?
I did.
Okay, we have one bill so far. I think it's miscellaneous tax, which we can play with. But,
I say if we pass this and trusted that the other body That's not an ideal way to govern, I
No,
know.
it is
but
not.
But the miscellaneous tax is a backup for us.
Oh, no, I don't think we could put this on tax. Unless somebody, yeah, unless somebody with, or as long as no one
Tax,
claims,
what it calls.
yeah. No one calls for Jermaine with, you do anything you want. Try not to. Okay, Senator McDonald,
I have nothing.
you said it all? Is that a no?
Left it all in the field.
The house was, then you can react, and maybe
You won't be able to.
some people who haven't met the meet and go through the public process. That we expect them to go through, and sometimes in emergencies,
So I've got,
they have me seeing Al Haig there, right?
right now I have a 2-2 tie. I do not see Senator Rob Hinsdale. She said she was going to zoom in, so.
The two.
What is it?
Yeah, she went home because she.
Who's saying what?
No, I don't have Senator Rob Hinsdale
Oh.
to vote,
Mhm.
so Randy,
What was the two? I missed that.
I think we should wait, and again, give the opportunity for the House or any, if we have another vehicle, to look at it, but we have not taken enough testimony, we don't have enough information, there are too many unanswered questions, and I'm not prepared to, on the spur of the moment, with such little input, to go forward.
Clarity, we are saying we don't support the substitute amendment, so that I'm voting against the substitute amendment.
okay,
Correct.
Okay.
I will say tomorrow and say that we had time today to take some more testimony on the substitute amendment, that we feel there's still too many unanswered questions. It's not integral to the bill and that we will oppose. Okay, can I have a vote? So if somebody asks me what the vote is?
And we're pursuing our original amendment, which is to take that language.
Yes,
out.
we are sticking by our original. All those in favor, this is a straw poll. Say aye.
In favor of,
Of standing by our original recommendation and
Remove that.
striking it. I am seeing this as 6. Okay, okay. I think that's it. We got one bill. There's 5 tax bills at least headed our way.
I think we should do a courtesy to the Government Operations Committee of making clear, at least speaking for myself, that I do not reject their language. I don't know enough about it.
Right,
We are the committee of jurisdiction and we don't want to rush it. That's all we're saying. We're not saying that they're wrong.
no, and we
The
said
issue is an
that,
important issue, we recognize that, which is why we want to do it right.
Yes.
okay, I will stand up tomorrow and say it. She is already upset with us.
Well, that's,
I told her yesterday. And I think this doesn't really change anything.
Well, again, I think that part of it is the discussion that we appreciate the work that the Government Operations Committee has done. We agree that this is an important issue to raise, and because it's so important, we need to do it right, and therefore we need more time to do it, and we don't have the time to do it in the present context.
Okay, I will say that. I don't know how much power we have, but in one form or the other, it will go to the House. Okay. Thank you all. Practice, we're gonna do late nights eventually.
how I have to go sing a funny song.
That's right, see, I got you off.
The Randolph Mud Season concert.